Hello, my name's Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you a look inside my scrap drawer, and I'll leave some links as well. The first thing I have on top of my scrap drawer is the selvage. The Ziploc bag with the selvage contains some strips of selvage pieces and some blocks that I made from selvage pieces, and I joined some of the units together. I have some leftovers from that Christmas fat quarter quilt that I just put out not too long ago. I've got a few more selvages from that Christmas fat quarter quilt. I've got various other pieces, small scraps, a few larger scraps, and Ziploc bags. I've got one Ziploc bag that contains almost all Halloween fabric. I've got a lot of little crumbs too, and I keep my little sewing machine vacuum in this drawer. I got a little battery powered vacuum when I clean my sewing machine out. It helps a lot. I didn't start out with a plan here. I just wanted to kind of open everything up and see what I had. I had a whole pack of fat 8s. I don't know what I'm going to do with those, but I did not cut those up into smaller pieces yet. My idea is I'm going to cut a 5-inch strip, a 2.5-inch strip, and a 1.5-inch strip from those fat 8s. If I run across some scraps here that are larger than a 5-inch square, I'm setting those aside because I can just cut 5-inch squares from those. However, if it's already a scrap piece, I am cutting it into a narrow strip. Well, by narrow, I mean about 2.5 inches or skinnier, just whatever the fabric seems to be calling for. Here's a really good example for this little scrap piece. I cut it so that the seams would get thrown in the trash. I didn't want to have all those seams for whatever the next project is, so I cut it accordingly. This little bag has been around quite some time. These scraps are in bad shape. You might have noticed also that I have both of my cutting mats out, and I've got them jammed up against the wall on the left and the wall in the back so that my scrap pieces are not falling off my table. Here's my little scrap mountain that I have to start with. All that time spent putting the scraps in some kind of order helped me realize what I wanted to try out today. So today I'm going to be taking some of this newsprint style paper. It's really thin newspaper texture paper that maybe kids' drawing tablets, that kind of texture. And I am going to be making 8.5 by 11-inch blocks using this paper. Now I like to put them diagonally, but I really have an idea that I want to make a rectangle string quilt. Most of the string quilts are square. If you want to make a rectangle diamond from strings, you need to make one block going from left to right and one block going from right to left, top to bottom. Otherwise, you will not be able to make a diamond. Here's a look at my setup. I've got all my scraps jammed and wedged over into the corner on the left with that cutting mat still in place to keep them from falling off the table. I've got my iron heating up and I'm setting my stitch length to 1.3. I choose 1.3. That makes a nice little perforation on the paper, and then when I tear it off, it comes off really easily. You do not have to use a foundation. I prefer to because I like to see how much farther I need to sew to cover up a certain area. So in this case, I'm doing 8.5 by 11. I like to have a foundation so I can see how big this is going to be, how much fabric I need to cover it. I cut one strip to start with, and I wanted to see how long that strip is. So a strip that's going to go diagonally across my 8.5 by 11 inch piece of paper needs to be 15 inches long. So I know that for every block, I'm going to need at least one strip that's 15 inches long, but I won't need any longer than that. To get started, I'm taking 2 strips of fabric and I'm stitching those right sides together with the paper on the bottom. I'm taking the time to go ahead and press the seam open. Now I can see to add another strip on the opposite side of my center strip. And again, this strip is not going to be as long as the center strip. And once I'm done stitching this seam, I'm going to press it open. I'm going to add shorter and shorter strips on both sides of this rectangle, following the line. My strips are wonky, so they won't all be straight. They might be skinnier on one side than they are on the other side. That's okay. These are going to be wonky string rectangles. I'm auditioning different pieces of fabric to make sure I get the right length and the right look. I am trying to do a little bit of variance with dark and light because I feel like that will make a pretty quilt. Once the center of the block gets big enough, you can add 2 pieces at a time and press 2 at a time on opposite sides. This little leftover here is from a scrap 5-inch square quilt that I made. I'll leave a link to that too because that was a very fun quilt. It made a gigantic quilt. I cut that giant quilt in half, made a quilted coat out of half of it, and I'm going to be able to finish the other half for a smaller child-size quilt. And this is just another good example of how I really do try to save my scraps and use them because fabric is just getting more and more expensive every day, and we just don't want to waste it if we can help it. It's a lot of fun going through the scraps too, because this little piece that I'm sewing on right now is from a beautiful, beautiful quilt that I made not too long ago. It was all blues and just pretty as can be. I've skipped a little bit ahead here so you can see the finished first block that I made, and these are all diagonal one way on this rectangle, and we'll be trimming that to 8.5 by 11. For my second block, I'm going to make sure this creates a V shape, or if it was upside down, a peak, because I want every other block to be going the opposite direction. So half my blocks need to be like the one on the left, and half of my blocks need to be the opposite with the V going the opposite way. As I go through these strips and these additional blocks, I'm still really trying to get a little bit of contrast between light and dark. This is really going to make a difference in the way this quilt turns out. I wanted to give you all a laugh today. I am going to show you the tornado that came in and wrecked my closet, and that tornado was myself. This is what I've got going on here on the floor beside my chair. I've got the table that you can see in the video before. It's all very organized looking up there, but the floor, I'm just throwing the small pieces down on the floor, and I'm trying to sort out the smaller pieces that I'm cutting off on that little tabletop to my left. but it was a disaster. When I got done making these blocks that I made in this fashion, it was so crazy. Here you can see I started making 2 blocks at a time just to get my assembly line process going and chain piece as much as possible. And here's a little close-up of why I needed one last tiny little triangle to cover up the corner of that paper. And it looks like that green is going to show through the yellow, so I'm going to go ahead and trim this right up to that yellow edge of fabric. So when it folds back on the line I just stitched, that green is not going to show through. I finished the blocks that I wanted to make in this rectangle method. I'm going to go ahead and take some time on speed viewing to sort these scraps out and get them sorted out by length. I have a few other scrap projects that I'll be doing videos on, and I want to make sure everything's nice and neat and put away where I can get at it for the types of projects I'm going to be making. Okay, let's talk about how to trim these blocks. As you stitch on paper, that paper is not going to be 8.5 by 11 when you finish. It might shrink up a little bit because of the stitching. I'm using my ruler, and first off I'm going ahead and cutting on the right side and the top side along that paper. Then when I flip it around the other way, I'm making sure the left and the bottom edge line up at 8.5 by 11 inches on my ruler, and then trimming the opposite 2 sides. I wanted to show you how easy this paper tears on the perforation that we made with the 1.3 stitch length. That worked out really well for the type of paper I'm using. Since most of the edges of these blocks will be cut on a diagonal angle, you're going to want to be very careful. You might want to leave the paper on until you stitch 2 blocks together. I don't mind going ahead and taking it off carefully, and then I'm just very careful when I stitch 2 blocks together not to stretch or pull or tug, because those sides will just be really stretchy if you give them too much pressure. Now that I have 8 of these rectangle blocks ready, I'm going to stitch 2 together that are opposites. So I'm making this V. I'm just going to stitch pairs together to make that V shape. There are other layouts that can be done with this type of block. Anything you can do with a half square triangle, you can do with this rectangle strip set quilt. Just keep in mind, you need pairs that are opposites. As I stitch these blocks together, you'll see I am back stitching at the beginning and end of each seam. These blocks are so stretchy, I don't want to take a chance that this is going to get messed up before I can add it to a larger project. Next, I'm going to stitch a pair together with another pair, but I'm going to turn them opposite directions to make my diamond shape. The only seam we need to match is the seam between the blocks. So I'm going to put these 2 sets right sides together, and I'm going to carefully start stitching again, back stitching at the beginning and the end. I'm going to make sure that middle seam does match up and nest, and just stitch the rest of this seam. And again, you definitely want to take your time when you're stitching these seams because this fabric is going to be super stretchy on that diagonal cut. Next, I'm going to press these seams open. Again, I'm being very gentle with this fabric. I don't want it to stretch out of shape. I want to keep everything together, so I'm just gently placing the iron flat down, straight down on the fabric, on the seam, and I'm not swishing side to side. I'm lifting and moving the iron. I went ahead and took the measurement of these two blocks made with an 8.5 by 11-inch base, and these blocks are 21.5 by 16.5. If I join those together, of course, I'd lose my seam allowance, but they're a nice size block, a nice size diamond, and these are going to be incorporated into a future scrap quilt that is going to combine lots of different kinds of scrap blocks. For a last look, I wanted to show you one of the blocks in black and white. I think that thinking about darks and lights in your quilting is pretty important. It draws the eye. Even if they're all different colors, having that dark and light contrast, something in the brain likes it. Feel free to leave a comment. I enjoy reading them. Let me know what you think about this type of rectangle string block. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you back again real soon.